Every major country on Earth is in debt today, not just fragile economies or developing nations, but the United States, Europe, Japan, China, and nearly every major emerging market as well, all operating under different political systems, different currencies, and different economic models, yet arriving at the same outcome: persistent red ink. The United States now carries more than $38 trillion in federal debt, with total public and private obligations extending far beyond that figure, while its debt-to-GDP ratio sits well above 120%, a level that, in earlier eras, was associated with post-war reconstruction rather than ordinary economic operation. Japan's government debt exceeds 250% of GDP, the highest ratio in the developed world, and yet its financial system continues to function year after year, not because the debt is shrinking, but because it is continuously rolled, refinanced, and absorbed within the structure of the economy. Across Europe, major economies such as France, Italy, and Spain operate with debt-to-GDP ratios ranging between 100 and 150%, while the European Union increasingly relies on shared borrowing mechanisms that did not exist a generation ago. China's official central government debt appears lower by comparison, but when provincial obligations, state-owned enterprises, and off-balance sheet financing vehicles are included, total debt rises well beyond 300% of GDP, distributed across the system rather than concentrated in a single ledger. Different structures, different accounting, different labels, yet the same result appears everywhere: red in the ledger. Some countries report that debt openly in balance sheets and budget documents, while others distribute it through state banks, guarantees, or quasi-government entities. But there is no major economy operating today without leverage as a permanent feature. That alone should feel strange, because debt was never meant to be universal. Historically, debt was temporary, used to fund wars, stabilize crises, or bridge emergencies, and then, over time, it was expected to be reduced. Instead, entire nations now operate year after year with negative balance sheets. While markets continue to function, governments continue to borrow. Growth is still measured, and confidence, at least on the surface, remains intact. When there is red in everyone's ledger, the issue is not simply who owes money, but who continues to get paid anyway, because a system built entirely on debt would not keep expanding if debt were only a sign of failure. Yet it does expand year after year across countries with different politics, different currencies, and different economic models, which suggests that repayment is no longer the organizing principle holding the system together. What matters instead is who benefits from debt not ending, and who is positioned inside a structure that depends on its continuation. We now live in a world where leverage is no longer the exception but the baseline, where governments fund stability through deficits, corporations fund growth through borrowed capital, households fund ordinary life through monthly payments, and financial markets define health not by repayment, but by continued access to refinancing. In this environment, financial stress rarely appears as outright insolvency, and more often shows up as liquidity strain, where the system continues to operate smoothly as long as obligations can be rolled forward, repriced, or extended. This is not a moral judgment. It is a description of how the system behaves. Once that becomes clear, it becomes easier to see why debt has shifted from a temporary tool into a permanent feature of modern economies. For most of history, debt was constrained by real limits. Empires borrowed to fight wars and then spent decades reducing what they owed. Governments issued bonds during emergencies rather than as permanent operating tools, and monetary systems were shaped by scarcity, political pressure, and settlement rules that forced discipline. Debt existed, but it was expected to end. Gold convertibility imposed boundaries, capital scarcity created trade-offs, and prolonged imbalance carried political consequences, which meant debt behaved very differently when there was a clear path to resolution. As economies grew larger, more interconnected, and more dependent on continuous growth, that settlement-based model quietly stopped working. Not because anyone formally abandoned it, but because the system became too large to clear obligations cleanly without creating stress elsewhere. When obligations were small, repayment restored balance. But when obligations became systemic, repayment began to drain liquidity, shrink balance sheets, and tighten financial conditions in ways the system could no longer tolerate. Debt did not become dangerous because people suddenly borrowed irresponsibly. It became difficult to resolve because the structure outgrew its ability to settle obligations without disruption. To understand who benefits in that environment, it helps to let go of the traditional idea of debt as a promise that moves steadily toward repayment. That model once made sense. Modern debt behaves differently. In today's financial architecture, debt functions less like a loan and more like a transfer mechanism, where the central objective is not elimination, but continuation. What matters is not whether the principal disappears, but whether the obligation can be rolled forward, extended, refinanced, repriced, or repackaged in a way that keeps the system moving. As tomorrow's debt replaces today's, balance sheets can remain red for decades without triggering collapse, because the system is organized around duration rather than resolution. Debt is no longer priced primarily on whether it will be paid off, but on spread, on between borrowing costs and lending returns, and on the volume of obligations flowing through the system over time. Alongside this structural shift comes a psychological one, because once debt is expected to persist, markets stop evaluating borrowers on whether they will ever fully repay and begin evaluating them on whether they can continue servicing obligations without interruption. Creditworthiness becomes less about traditional solvency and more about access. Access to refinancing, access to liquidity, and access to confidence, which explains why systems built on debt often appear stable right up until the moment that access becomes constrained. Periods of low interest rates tend to reinforce this dynamic rather than resolve it, because cheaper refinancing does not eliminate obligations, but stretches them across longer timelines, embedding them more deeply into the system while preserving the appearance of stability. The greatest advantage in this structure does not sit solely with borrowers or lenders, but with intermediaries positioned between issuance and capital, between obligation and yield, and between risk and return. These layers benefit from continuity, complexity, scale, and time, because every extension generates fees, every refinancing resets terms, and every rollover preserves the machinery itself. If debt were eliminated at scale, the system that processes it would contract, so instead the architecture adapts, extending maturities, adjusting rates, restructuring terms, and evolving accounting rules in ways that preserve flow rather than eliminate obligation. No conspiracy is required for this behavior, because aligned incentives naturally produce aligned outcomes. This structure did not emerge slowly or by accident. It took shape when global obligations reached a scale that could no longer be realistically settled, forcing systems to prioritize maintenance over resolution. At that point, repayment stopped functioning as the stabilizing force, and rollover became the rule, transforming debt from a temporary condition into a permanent feature of modern financial architecture. From there, stability came to mean something different. It no longer meant paying things off. It meant keeping the system moving. This is why modern crises rarely begin with balance sheet failure and instead emerge as liquidity events, where markets freeze, refinancing windows close, and access, rather than solvency, becomes the pressure point. As long as rollover remains possible, red ledgers are tolerated. But when access disappears, pressure concentrates quickly, revealing how dependent the system has become on continuity. This is also why discussions about debt often feel unsatisfying, because people argue about morality, discipline, or responsibility, while the system itself responds to incentives that reward persistence rather than correction. Once debt becomes infrastructure, the discussion shifts away from whether it is good or bad, and toward a more fundamental issue: how long a system can remain stable when resolution is no longer built into its design. In modern financial systems, debt is not a flaw, it is infrastructure. The system does not reward eliminating debt, it rewards managing its flow, which means that when everyone is in debt, benefit accrues not to whoever owes the least, but to whoever controls duration, intermediation, and continuity most effectively. That is how the system functions, regardless of whether people approve of it. So when there is red in everyone's ledger, the issue is not morality or discipline, but structure. And if debt is no longer a temporary tool, but a permanent feature of modern systems, then the question that remains is not how to eliminate it, but what financial stability actually means now. This is Money Margins. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.